Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. So we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm your host, Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. We just passed 550 and 560 subs. Thank you guys so much for all the support, and I hope I can continue to make great content you guys will enjoy in the future. Now, it's the second to the last week of the XFL season in 2023. This is week 9. There's only 10 weeks in the whole season, but it's getting really interesting, especially in the Northern Division with the playoff race. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But let's start out with our first game. You have the Vegas Vipers traveling on the road to the Houston Roughnecks. This is an interesting game because the Houston Roughnecks have been struggling as of late. They've only won one of their 4 last games, but Vegas, they've been playing better as of late with Jalen McClendon at quarterback. He's been actually pretty solid now that Louis Perez has gone to the Arlington Renegades and Brett Hundley's been benched. But Vegas did lose last week to the St Louis Battlehawks 21-17 in overtime. And actually Vegas was pretty solid in that game on defense, but their offense did struggle. Jalen McClendon was really solid in their game before last week, but against St. Louis, he really struggled. He was only 13-23 for 159 yards, a touchdown, but he did have 62 rushing yards, so he does provide you with that rush attack. But still, Jalen McClendon is going to have to play a better game if Vegas wants to get the win on the road at Houston. But Houston, they're 5-3, and last week Houston squeaked out a win over San Antonio 17-15 in overtime. It was their first win in their last 4 games. That was huge for Houston to get the momentum back, and they still lead the South Division in the XFL at 5-3. But Brandon Silvers, he was only 17-36 for 146 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions last week. And Cole McDonald, he was the starting quarterback for Houston the week before that because Brandon Silvers was hurt. But Brandon Silvers at the beginning of the season was playing some of the best football of any quarterback in the XFL, but he has really struggled as of late. But Brandon Silvers is still a really talented quarterback, but he did not play good football last week. But if Brandon Silvers can play better football against Vegas this week, I think Houston is the much better football team on both sides of the ball. Vegas is improving, and I think they will have a chance to go on the road and get the win at Houston, especially if Jalen McClendon plays well. But if Brandon Silvers plays better than he did last week against the San Antonio Brahmas, or if Cole McDonald comes in and has some moments where he plays well, he's actually the one that won the game for Houston by getting a 2-point conversion pass in overtime. That was huge for the Houston Roughnecks. Then I think Houston will get the win, and I am going to go with the Houston Roughnecks to get their 6th win of the season and win 24-17 over the Vegas Vipers. Now the next game is the Orlando Guardians traveling on the road to the San Antonio Brahmas, 2 of the bottom teams in the XFL. Orlando's 1-7, San Antonio's 2-6, and both teams have been playing better as of late. Orlando last week lost 18-16 to Arlington. They probably should have won that game, and they would have won 2 games in a row after upsetting the previously unbeaten DC Defenders. But Orlando was not able to beat Arlington because Quentin Dormany, while he was great against DC, having 6 touchdowns, he was 28-43 for 303 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and 3 fumbles against Arlington. He had 5 total turnovers. Eli Rogers had 135 yards receiving and a touchdown, and obviously Cody Latimer still leads the XFL in receiving yards, and you have Charleston Rambo as well at wide receiver. Orlando has a great receiving core, but Quentin Dormany has to play at a high level or Orlando cannot win. And also you look at Orlando's defense, they are sketchy at times, but they have been improving as of late. But Orlando's going to have to get a good game from Quentin Dormany if they want to go on the road and beat San Antonio. The Brahmas, their offense is really struggling. Last week they lost 17-15 to the Houston Roughnecks in overtime. They had a really good chance to win that game. Jack Cohn led the Brahmas down the field for a touchdown and a 3-point conversion to tie the game. But in overtime, they couldn't get anything going. Jack Cohn was 23-41 for 190 yards and 2 interceptions. And Jock Patrick had 96 yards rushing in the game as well for San Antonio. But overall, the Brahmas offensive line is horrible, and Jack Cohn does not have enough time to throw the ball. If he had more time, I think that the Brahmas would have a lot better of a chance to win this game and more games in the future. And while Orlando is a good team for San Antonio to play to potentially get a win, and this game's at San Antonio, I think Orlando overall has been playing much better football, and I'm expecting Quentin Dormany to have a bounce-back game. If he plays just a little bit better than he did last week, then Orlando should be able to get this win. You look at San Antonio and Jack Cohn, he had a solid game, but they still weren't able to win overall. I'm going to go with the Orlando Guardians to bounce back, Quentin Dormany to have a bit better of a football game, and I'm going with Orlando to beat San Antonio 21-17 for the Orlando Guardians' 2nd win of the XFL season. Now, the next game on deck is the Arlington Renegades at 4-4, traveling on the road to the DC Defenders, who are 7-1. This is a bad matchup for Arlington. Do they have a chance to win? For sure. But Arlington is a team that barely beat the Orlando Guardians 18-16 last week. That was a good win. But Arlington, they are 4-4, but they've won all of their games by less than 5 points. So that does not inspire confidence that Arlington can hang with the best teams in the XFL when they barely beat teams like San Antonio and Orlando. And Arlington's now is Louis Perez at quarterback, and he did play better football last week for Arlington. He was 16 of 25 for 190 yards, and Letty Brown at 47 yards rushing. But Arlington kind of reminds me of San Antonio, but just with a better record. They don't have a lot of offense. They really struggle to score. Their defense is solid, and Louis Perez, if he starts to get comfortable in the offense for Arlington, maybe he will start to improve the offense overall. But they're going to have to go on the road to play at DC. And DC is unbeaten at home with the Beer Snake. The Beer Snake is real. DC is a great football team at home. They have the best home environment in the XFL, along with St. Louis. Both of those home environments are incredible. And DC last week beat the Seattle Sea Dragons 34-33 to bounce back after their upset loss to the Orlando Guardians. And Jordan Ta'amu had his best game of his XFL career. He was 17 of 26 for 247 yards and 4 touchdowns. He looked like he was in complete control of the DC offense. Abram Smith still the top running back in the XFL. He had 66 rushing yards and a touchdown last week for DC. And DC was able to squeak out the win at Seattle on the road at the Sea Dragons. So that was a huge win for DC to be able to get that 1-point win. They're 7-1 in the XFL. They've looked like at times the best team in the league, except when St. Louis is playing at their best. I think that DC is going to pose a big problem for Arlington. Their home crowd is really going to give the Renegades fits. The Beer Snake will be alive and well, and it will be very long and very intimidating for the Arlington Renegades. And I think that DC overall is going to play a really solid game. Jordan Ta'amu is not going to make mistakes. He's going to completely outplay Louis Perez. And you also have the times that De'Aaron King's in the game as well. I just think DC is going to have way too much offense in this game. And I'm going to go with the DC Defenders to beat the Arlington Renegades fairly comfortably, 28-14 for the DC Defenders' 8th win of the season. And for the final game of the Week 9 XFL slate, we have potentially the game of the week. The Seattle Sea Dragons at 5-3, traveling on the road to the St. Louis Battlehawks, who are 6-2. This is a fantastic matchup between top quarterbacks potentially if A.J. McCarron is able to play. Seattle's a good football team. They're 5-3, but all of their losses have been fairly close. They only lost to the St. Louis Battlehawks earlier in the year on their own field by 2, but they're playing better football now. And last week, they only lost by 1 point to the DC Defenders, 34-33. There is no shame in losing like that to DC. Ben DiNucci was 28-42 for 301 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception in that game, so he played fairly well. When Ben DiNucci keeps the turnovers to a minimum, he's a great quarterback. Juwan Green had 142 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns in the game against DC for Seattle, and you still have Josh Gordon, who could potentially return to the NFL after the XFL. He's a great player, and I think that overall that Seattle has a great offense. Their defense can struggle at times, which does not really help Seattle in this game because they're having to travel on the road to St. Louis, and A.J. McCarron is a fantastic quarterback, but will he play in this game? He got banged up a couple weeks ago, and he did not play last week for St. Louis, and yes, the Battlehawks were able to beat the Vegas Vipers 21-17 in overtime, but you could tell their offense was not the same with Nick Tiano in the game. He had 194 yards on 19-34 passing, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions and 51 rushing yards, but he's definitely not the quarterback A.J. McCarron is, and he's much more turnover prone. I think that Nick Tiano should be used more for St. Louis to run the football, kind of like how they bring in De'Aaron King for DC. I don't think that A.J. McCarron needs to run that much. You don't want him getting hurt because that's how he did get hurt for St. Louis. But if A.J. McCarron's able to play and he's not rusty and he's able to come back and play the way that he has been playing, St. Louis will have a great chance to win because their home crowd, like DC, is fantastic. They don't have a Beer Snake, but their crowd is insane. Now that St. Louis doesn't have a pro football team with the St. Louis Rams anymore, the Battlehawk fans are so glad to see a team in St. Louis. They love their team and they give their team so much support. It's going to be really difficult for Seattle to go on the road and get the win. This game is so important for the XFL playoff standings. Both these teams are fighting for a playoff spot, and if Seattle loses, they'll be eliminated from the playoffs. So this is a huge game for both teams, but I do think if A.J. McCarron's back and healthy, I think that St. Louis's offense will be too much for Seattle. I think it should be a great game, the game of the week in the XFL if A.J. McCarron's playing, but I'm going to go with the St. Louis Battlehawks to beat the Seattle Sea Dragons 27-20. It should be a fantastic game, and if St. Louis wins their 7th game of the season, they'll be going to the XFL playoffs. Now, that's the Week 9 XFL games. There's a lot of great games. The XFL season's winding down, but the USFL is about to start, so it's going to get very interesting with football. You still have 2 spring football leagues going on. It's going to be a lot of fun to see what happens down the stretch of the XFL season and in the XFL playoffs. Comment down below what you think about the Week 9 XFL games, what you think about my picks, and who you think will win the Week 9 XFL games. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter. Link is in the description, and I will see you next time.